And we are recording. Hello, Louis. Hello, Ellie.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the In Your Own Words blog. How are you both doing?
All right.
Yeah, fine, doing well.
Excited to have this discussion.
Yeah, I've never been on a blog before. I'm excited to see what it's like. See what it's like on the inside of a blog.
Important enough to be interviewed, which is a
Yeah,
strange situation to be in.
I don't normally feel that important.
It's very overrated. It's very overrated.
Flattering us. That's the point.
Yeah, you're supposed to.
Sorry. Yeah, no, sorry. I'm very honoured to have you both on. How before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty things, how has lockdown been treating you both?
It's been mixed. There's been things that have been very easy and things that have been very hard. We specifically are still in lockdown, despite the fact that most of the lockdown curbs have been eased, which is really hard. Some things, like I'm not a particularly outgoing person, so the prospect of being stuck at home is not the end of the world, but for so long, it's gradually been eating away at what I want to do and how I want to kind of move on with my life in general. So it's not been all at once. It's been slow and difficult rather than just straightforwardly challenging, I think.
Yeah. I mean, like Louis says, you're a bit of an introvert, and so am I. So, it started out fine. I wasn't too bothered about the lack of social interaction, and I was still getting to talk to my friends and family over video call. But you start missing it. It's been months now. I'm looking forward to it easing, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think, excuse me, I think many people, nearly everyone I talk to on the blog is in the same boat. I think everyone's kind of just getting on with it for the sake of getting on with it, and hopefully, everyone's kind of looking forward to the brighter end of things. When things are eventually lifted. So today, anyway, we're going to talk about theatre. Woo! Go theatre! More specifically, we're going to talk about online virtual theatre. We're going to talk about a very, very exciting project that you guys obviously figureheaded, and the company that you've started. So we'll start it right to the very beginning then. First of all, how did you guys meet? How did you guys know that you wanted to do theatre together? And how did you decide, why did you decide that you wanted to create a theatre company?
I mean, we could probably talk for hours with just the very first question.
The thing to remember is, although those sound like very related questions, they're actually all separate stories. Of those three things, how did we meet? How did we decide we wanted to form a theatre company? And how did we actually do what we did? Those are all distinct. They're all separate instances, and they kind of came together gradually over time. We've known each other for 3 years now.
3?
We've known each other for 3.
Oh, bloody hell.
Yeah. But we met through theatre. So the University of Leicester Theatre Society was where we met. We were in a show together, and we formed a friendship based on that. And that has developed since. And then we've I've since graduated from university, and now you are in the process of graduating as of this year, which is obviously very difficult in the current climate. But as our relationship developed, we both kind of came to the shared conclusion that we didn't want theatre to end when we were done with our university careers. For us, theatre was a core part of what we wanted to do as a hobby, and there was no question of did we want to carry it on? We absolutely did. So then we were looking at our future in general, what we were going to do with our lives afterwards, and we pretty much said openly that wherever we went, we were going to take theatre with us, and that would mostly entail starting a theatre company. And we reached that conclusion many months ago, a long time ago, and we knew that was going to happen when we left, and we're in the process of leaving now. We're kind of in a transitional period between leaving Leicester and going to where we'll be in pastures new. But so we knew that was coming. And then the third part of that, why did we actually do it? That all happened because of circumstance. We were originally going to put on a show, as we had done. You know, we've both directed and produced. Well, produced. We've been showrunners a couple of times over each, and we wanted to put on a show together. And the time in which we were planning the show was just as the coronavirus pandemic was coming into the fore. And there were a lot of question marks over what would be possible and what wouldn't be possible. And so, because it was in the very early stages, this was March, early March or mid-March.
Might have been February that we
Might have
started
been
thinking
February,
about
yeah.
it. Yeah.
We were looking at different plans. We wanted to do a very complex production that unfortunately fell by the wayside. We wanted to do things that were really complicated, and that fell through because it looked increasingly like it wasn't going to be possible. So then after that, we came up with a kind of a 3-stage plan for what we wanted to do with the University of Leicester Theatre Society. The plan was that if a full show was possible, we would do that. If we would have to do it in a manner where we had no audience and we had to broadcast it online, that was also an option. And then our ultimate backup option was, in a manner very similar to what we now know as the classic Zoom call, we wanted to broadcast a Zoom call of the show with people communicating, mostly like a radio play.
Yeah.
That was the intention, that if you could just turn off the footage and just listen, you would hear a radio show and it would make sense. But with the show in front of you and with the people in front of you expressing themselves, it would add a little bit more visually. Unfortunately, there were some difficulties with getting that show through the University Theatre Society, and so it wasn't going to be possible to run it with them. So we decided to do it ourselves, but obviously we were still going to try and do it to the same timescales, and that meant that all of our plans for setting up a theatre company had to be rapidly accelerated. And that meant setting up Fervid TheatreWorks as it exists now, setting up the branding for it, setting up our social media presence on it, trying to build an audience online, which is not something that either of us have ever had to do on such a scale before.
No, we had to have a crash course in creating a theatre company in a time when it was very, very different to what it would usually have been, you know. I think we did all right. I think we did an okay job, do you?
Yeah. And I had a pretty clear vision of how it would be structured from the early stages. You know, I ran the technical side of things for the show, and I knew that it was eminently possible to do. You know, a lot of my experience and skills come from the video game streaming side of the world, with regards to streaming footage from your devices. I know, Josh, you've done a discussion before about things like esports. Of course, esports wouldn't be possible if you couldn't capture your screen and send the footage of your screen over the internet to somebody else's, and that is the technology that we used. You know, that all of that streaming. I could get very technical about it.
Don't get him started.
Yeah. But in principle, you know, we set up the Zoom call. We broadcast that call live via streaming services. In this case, we used YouTube and we used Facebook Live, and we sent it to both of those such that people could watch it. And then we decorated it with you know, a little frame, and I did introductory and closing, you know, little speeches off the cuff to try and keep it fairly slick. And it was a big undertaking because we had to be sure that it was going to work technically. There were a lot of potential risks with regards to things like internet not being strong enough, or viewership not being particularly high because it hadn't been broadcast widely enough, you know, that sort of thing. So there were a lot of challenges. We had to weigh up a lot of decisions, and I think in the future we'd make a couple of minor changes, but in principle the idea worked. And I mean, it was exactly, it was the best thing we could put together in the climate. You know, we could not have put together a better end product technically than what we did in the times in which we're living. And as a result, we're going to look at continuing the model for how it's structured and the way that it's distributed going forward. You know, whereas beforehand we were originally envisaging that our theatre company would be very traditional. It would have shows with purchase tickets that you come and attend. Now we're questioning whether actually we need to adapt the format to be largely online for an online presence, because in an online presence you can capture a much wider range of people, and you can also distribute it for free. If you distribute it at no charge, more people will see it and it'll get the word out further. And that coverage, certainly for us right now, is far more important than people in seats sitting in front of us.
And I think it's bigger than that. I think the current climate has meant that audiences are much more receptive to online theatre. There's lots of different theatre companies that are putting out live shows that, you know, they've pre-recorded. I think going forward, those same companies will live stream theatre more often, especially considering that they too will have realised that they can get far more expansive audiences. So I think we're just kind of like not a step ahead, but we're in the game as it's starting. If we continue with that model going forward.
Yeah, it's rare, especially on the internet. It's rare to be an early adopter for a new technology, and we're not really. You know, the technology that we've used is not the future; it's the present. But the way that we're using it to our ends is something that we think is going to be the next up and coming thing, so we're jumping on it now.
I mean, you guys are an interviewer's dream. You just answered about 9 of my questions all in one speech. That's fantastic, though. I'm trying to think where to go from here. Fervid TheatreWorks. What would you say are the principles of your company?
Never sat down and thought about principles, have we?
Not particularly. For us, I mean, there's. I don't want to list any one principle and suggest that it might be more or less important than other things that we've considered. One of the big things for us is that we were quite constrained in some of our previous formats for producing shows. And it was not any particular person or organisation's fault directly. It was more to do with the fact that traditional theatre has a lot of there's a lot of bureaucracy in it, unexpectedly so, with regards to things like rights for plays and how you can perform them, what you can and can't do within a theatre setting. And that doesn't get much easier when you move online. In fact, it gets harder because actually, you know, for the way that it works for producing a play is that you have to have a performance license for it, and that's done on a play-by-play basis, night by night. And the only time that you are exempt from those is if you're performing a play that is in the public domain, or you have special permission to perform from the copyright holder. Otherwise, you will be, you know, infringing on copyright, and that opens you up to all sorts of questionable legal status. And unfortunately, the companies that distribute licenses to produce shows are nowhere near being able to distribute them for the purposes of online production.
Well, I don't think it's something that they're actually set up to do. You know,
No.
Theatre itself is generally thought of as something that's performed live. It's not recorded. There's not really a history of it being recorded traditionally. You know, you get some live shows that were made for TV, but that's about it. You know, that you can't just go and apply for rights to perform it live, because it's not a format that's ever had to been accounted for before.
Yeah. And the major difficulty really is that when you're doing an online performance, as we know, if you put something out there on the internet, it's out there forever. It will be recorded in some manner or another. So if I were to stream something live to YouTube, say, they will automatically save that recording. which will immediately be an infringement on any performance license I could currently acquire. So there's no way within the terms of any contract you can get from a theatre publisher to actually do that. Now, that it's different when you're at the higher level. You know, during lockdown, we've mentioned already that a lot of theatre companies have been streaming their back catalogue of pre-recorded shows, and those shows are all done under special license anyway. You know, they're able to modify the terms of their contract, and that's why they're able to have cameras in the auditorium to begin with.
Yeah.
Whereas in a traditional amateur dramatic show, such as we would be, we can't do that. We don't
have the money for it.
We don't have the money, but we also don't have the clout.
Yeah.
We can't.
Contacts.
Exactly. So when we're working from where we are, we have to look at directions that give us more creative freedom. So I suppose, in answer to the original question, one of the guiding principles is the ability to maximize creative freedom by making the right choices early. So for us, that principally means performing shows that are in the public domain, or that are otherwise under special contract to us. And the traditional show is not really something we can do in the format that we have it. So that's one in a roundabout way. But there are others as well. I think we want it to be, because it's obviously amateur dramatics, it's accessible, and it's accessible to people who want to act. If you want to get your to kind of enhance your ability to be able to say, I have done high quality performance, and you're using that perhaps to enhance an acting CV, or perhaps you want to be able to put together a show reel based upon this sort of stuff, we operate open casting, which most amateur dramatic societies will do. Some of them can be a little bit more private than others, but for the most part, we're very interested in having people come and audition for us. We want people to be able to explore their acting talents and be able to get themselves out there. And that was something else that I think we gained by moving away from a university amateur dramatic society, because now we are a name that can be used on someone's acting CV.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think we intend to take our show running skills to higher levels, because we like what we're doing and we like where we are and where we're putting on shows. But if we can facilitate that upward momentum for people and they can reach places on the back of doing a show for us, that's absolutely fantastic. And we would want that tremendously for our actors.
I think one of the freedoms of the format from the show we've just done, Ernest, was that we could put a open casting call to anyone, anywhere, as long as they were happy to be able to attend the times of the rehearsals. Then they could come from a different country, you know? And that's something I'm actually going to miss, because going forward, as Louis said, we want to continue doing live shows, but we would prefer to be able to all perform in the same space. And we won't be able to cast as wide a net, perhaps, as we have done with our last show, which I think is a shame. But you know, it was really, really lovely to be able to explore performing with people from all over the country.
Yeah, it was good. You know, we had a wide spread, for, you know, obviously everyone is stuck in their own homes, and for our show past, they were indeed all over the country. They were in several different cities, all at once, and able to communicate with people in various different locations around the United Kingdom.
And our audiences were all over the United Kingdom as well. So that, it was really, really nice to be able to connect with so many people through theatre at a time when theatre is really, really struggling to be able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, starting off as a theatre company, starting off as theatre makers, doing your first show kind of post university into a more professional setting is difficult enough, let alone doing it under these current circumstances in which we're under, and doing it online, you know. So I mean, it's a great credit to what you guys have done already and what you're going to do. You know, I think also another thing I love about, you know, the project and about Fervid TheatreWorks, is that I think you have such a fantastic fusion of the beauty of theatre being live in the moment and feeling like you're part of that world and being in it, as well as bringing that joy to everyone, lots and lots of different people sat in their homes that can't get out to the theatre. And
Yeah.
a really fantastic thing that you're able to do that, I think.
Yeah, that was something that I wanted to really make clear when I was doing the little, I did those little speeches before and after every act in the show, and I wanted to make it clear that what we wanted to do with that show specifically, as it was a comedy, was to bring that sense of joy to people in these times. And we said at the beginning, at the top of this interview, that lockdown has been hard, and it's been insidiously hard. It's been hard over time, gradually, and for a long time, one of the only things that was keeping me going was putting together the show, because the entire show was done under various different rules and regulations with regards to freedom of movement and what we can and couldn't do. So to be able to do the entire show under those circumstances gave me personally something to look forward to every day.
Yeah.
And something to be proud of looking back on the fact as well. I think something that we've discussed in the past was we want to be able to say, what did we do during the lockdown? And we are so proud to have been able to put together something so huge to us. And it was a wonderful experience. Not even just despite the lockdown, but because of the lockdown, we wouldn't have been able to be so creative and push it so far, or even be encouraged to have done a show under our own company. If it wasn't for this pandemic.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a cliche saying, but like it's our silver lining of this whole thing.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, and you've touched upon quite an interesting angle there, about kind of where we'd be at in the future looking back. Because I suppose, that's going to be the same for a lot of people, like the lockdown is going to go down in history, and people are going to look back and think, what did I do in lockdown? And as you were saying, lockdown is hard enough as it is, whether you're working from home, whether you've been furloughed, whether you're in a worse kind of off situation. It's hard enough as it is just to kind of live your life normally, or trying to live your life normally, let alone trying to live your life normally and putting on such a massive project.
In many ways, putting on the project made being in lockdown easier.
Yeah.
Because it gave me purpose. It made me feel like the time that I was spending in isolation or in relative isolation was worthwhile, and that I was making the most of the opportunity. So
I think we've heard the same from our actors as well. They were all really pleased to be able to continue doing what they like to do during the lockdown. So it's nice to be able to give them the opportunity to be able to carry on acting, when even professional actors are not able to do that.
Yeah, more than one of our actors were actually due to be in shows that got cancelled or indefinitely postponed as a result of what happened. So I think for them, there was a kind of a sense of relief that they would still be able to do something during this time.
Yeah.
And that they were able to take part in a show when they felt like what had been their show had been taken away from them.
Yeah, yeah. And putting on that kind of first show as a theatre company is probably one of the hardest steps you'll make. And now you finish that show, you're in a really exciting point of the company's history now. Where you have that show, you have the bit of clout. People are aware of your work. You've already have the connections with lots of different creatives to go forward. You have a bit of money now to go into the next production. So it is, it's a very, very exciting time. And I'm excited for you, like genuinely. I'm really kind of excited, and I'm really excited to see where you guys take it and stuff, But anyway, let's bring it back to this show. So obviously you went for Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest, one of the most famous plays in the world, frankly. what made you come to the decision to put on this show?
Well, far from it just being the most important play or one of the most well-known plays going, it's also in the public domain. And I'm worried that we had to be, careful about copyright law, and we knew, I know a fair bit about what can and can't be done within the constraints that we had, and so ultimately what I did was do some research over some of the most famous public domain works that are out there.
Project Gutenberg that became my best friend for a few days while we were reading all of the plays.
Oh, it's a fantastic library of public domain plays. It's actually full of public domain works in general. There's lots of public domain books on there as well, and some of them are play scripts. But the reason why there were a lot of factors that made The Importance of Being Earnest exactly the right choice. The principal one really was that it was a comedy. We knew that we should do a comedy because it had to be joyful and it had to be funny. But then for me, as I trawled through the script to kind of get a picture of what would be required in terms of actually putting the show on and making the show effective. And what really sold it 100% to me was the fact that the humor is almost entirely verbal, and it explains itself in exactly the right amount of detail to make the format that we were delivering it in incredibly funny. So, for instance, there's loads of different quips and snarky comments and what have you, but nothing relies too heavily on props. Nothing relies too heavily on setting. Nothing relies too heavily on costume, because we don't really have any of those things. We weren't able to put together a set. We weren't really able to use too many props, and we weren't able to really go to town on the costume either, because we were limited by what people had in their own homes, and we couldn't demand everything out of our actors because they were limited on resources themselves. So we had to be very careful about what kind of a play we put on. But and I did tweak the script in a few places to try and help our audience have a mental picture of how characters were moving within a scene. And we got some lovely feedback from some of our audience members who said that they forgot that they were not watching the show, and that they forgot that it wasn't really happening in front of them, and that they were able to fill in the gaps themselves. And the script was pivotal to that. We needed one where if somebody does something, they explain what they're doing, or someone else explains what they're doing. People announce their arrivals and departures, so you can, in your mind, add and remove them from the moment.
I think the audiences as well, having had to, like us, contact friends and family over Zoom, have at a time when it's really difficult to stay in contact with people, they've gotten used to seeing people in that format. So it's actually helped us in that everybody at the moment is talking to people in this way. So they were able to see the characters talking to each other and not feel too much disconnect from it.
Yeah, it's come by necessity, and therefore the majority of people understand why it is the way it is, and give us that credit. There's
an element of forgiveness to it.
Absolutely.
As well. Because it's never going to be the same as performing and talking to someone together. There's a reason why we wanted to schedule the meeting, so that we could still be in the same room. Because it does help people, but it was a few months into the lockdown by then, and people were used to that format and were forgiving enough to know that that was the circumstance that we were in. If we tried to do something like that in a year's time, say, when all of the theatre companies are starting to do live performances together, people probably wouldn't be so forgiving of the format.
I mean, and also, excuse me, talking about how big the play is, which is obviously a big positive because it's well known to everyone. I think also there's also a sense of bravery with taking on a play like that, because for the same reason it is known by so many people, and there's been so many different adaptations of it, and you know, like I said, it's a very, very well known show. Were you kind of conscious of that when you were in the process of putting the show together?
I mean, admittedly, I hadn't really looked at the show before Louis lent the idea to me, and we looked at a few film versions of it. I have my favourites, and
we looked at several.
Yeah.
It has been done many times, and it's been done thankfully in film form many times, which is the most useful when you need to research something.
But I think, going back to what you were saying, I didn't realise how big of a deal it would be to do that show personally, because I hadn't had much exposure to it. But I'm so glad I have now. I'm so glad I've been able to read through it and study it.
Yeah, it's fantastically funny, and that's the reason why it's done so often, because I mean, in my opinion, it's Oscar Wilde's finest work of any of the work of his that I've read, and it's so. It doesn't take itself at all seriously, which I think lends itself to being done and redone. A show that takes itself very seriously can be prescriptive in how it's performed. But the other thing as well for me was that I wasn't afraid of doing something that's been done many times, because I knew that we were going to have to be transformative, because we were already doing it under difficult circumstances. The fact that it was going to be in a new style, i.e. This kind of hybrid radio play Zoom call, is already different, and is already going to make the show a different, something different to what it has been before. So, you know, I didn't have much fear with regards to doing a popular show for another time.
And I would say the minute we saw the quality of the actors who were auditioning, that any sort of fear that we would have had would have disappeared, because they were all amazing, and we just knew that it would work with every single one of them.
Yeah. Fantastic then, fantastic. Okay, so moving forward then, let's for anyone watching this that won't know you personally, let's try and get into both of your heads as theatre makers, and try to help people that may not know you kind of understand your process. As theatre makers then, as directors and as producers and as general showrunners, when you're putting a scene together, and obviously I'm expecting both of you to probably have very individual answers with this, what's the most important thing to you as a creative, as putting things together, when it does come to addressing a scene? And which I understand is a very, very difficult question, but I always find it quite interesting to ask other creatives kind of, you know, what's important to them when they're putting together the scene.
I think the best way, so there are two ways to approach approach handling a scene. First, there are several different aspects to doing it. So you have to think about the emotional quality of the scene, what emotions you want the audience to feel, where things are going to be tenser, where things are going to be more relaxed, where things are going to be funnier, and that all comes out of the script. That should be pretty evident in the script alone. And then once you've identified that yourself ahead of time, you will be prepared for that, you know, as you set the scene up. And then when it comes to actually putting the show on, in a traditional show, we would block it, which is to say that you would organise the specific movements, positioning, prop interaction, everything that all of the characters will do within that scene. But that, I tend to find, is best done by letting the actors loose on it first, using the characters that they're building, because then their characters will be behaving more naturally within that moment. They will be doing what they feel they should do, and then you tweak and adjust it to kind of flatten out the curves and make it work for you. And sometimes you'll make movements and do things to identify with specific emotional beats along the way. So, I mean, for instance, when we were doing The Importance of Being Earnest, we were very lucky in that our actors understood the script terrifically well from the get-go, and we're able to identify those emotional twists and turns throughout the script. He required a small amount of intervention from us, and that was the rehearsal process, was identifying that, tweaking and changing that. And because we were in this new format, we didn't have to worry about blocking things. We didn't have to worry about where they physically were.
And it's usually such a huge part of the process that we actually found that we had to make sure that the actors felt comfortable physically, whereas usually you wouldn't really have to focus as much on that because that would come with the blocking and, as you said, you know, getting used to being your character. When you're sat in your living room talking to your computer, it's very, very difficult to just get into the character. We as directors had to learn how to help the actors with that, and that was a learning curve for us. You know, we would get feedback from the actors saying this helped, this did not help, and build off that. But I think the formula that we ended up with worked. Thankfully.
Based off what you just said then, would you both agree that you are more kind of naturalistically minded rather than like absurdist? Or
obviously it's personal preference. I enjoy watching non-naturalistic shows. I think they can be very entertaining, they can be very interesting, and I like to employ aspects of them. I like to cherry pick the aspects of them that I like and use them where I can in certain scenes. And I think it's very important to be open to alternative forms of alternative structures for theatre, to help influence you on what you can do to make your show more effective. Because I think there's so much scope for deviating from naturalism and then bringing it back again to make a point. You can come away from it and return in any direction you like. For me, I'm too traditional to deviate from naturalism for the most part. I love it. I think it's the best way to put on shows. And I think a lot of that comes down to how I grew up with film and TV, which always tends to be that way inclined as well. And you tend to get a lot less absurdist or other forms of theatre within film and TV. So that it's what I've grown up on. It's what I really like to see. But like I say, there are times when moving away from it and doing something unusual can be incredibly effective, because you're making a point of it, and it becomes it's not at all saturated, and it can catch you as an audience member off guard and make it very, very interesting.
I think you can almost consider non-naturalistic as more building blocks to naturalistic. You know, the first few plays I was involved in all had elements of not being naturalistic, and I think that really helped me learn how to direct naturalistic acting and perform as well. I think it's very important to think about whilst you're blocking a scene, because none of it is natural. Every single bit that you're blocking out is very, very heavily thought about and choreographed by the final product. So I think it's a very important aspect of theatre, but like Louis, I tend to form more to the naturalistic side of things now.
It's funny you were just saying that, because sorry, you go ahead. You going to say something?
No, that's right.
No, okay, it's fine. I was going to say, it's funny you're saying that, because not only, I'm talking, sorry, to Ellie specifically here, not only did you, in one of the first shows that you did that I met you anyway, not only did you tackle absurdist theatre, you took on Kafka's Metamorphosis, which is, you know, wildly renowned as one of the most absurdist plays like ever written, you know. So it's very interesting to kind of hear your thought process in those terms, you know.
Metamorphosis was where I think I personally learned how to act and how to think about acting. It was the first play I was in where I had a large part. So as the first play, the most influential play over me and my process, I think it has had a huge impact on how I think of the building blocks of like emotion, and because everything's so exaggerated in Metamorphosis, you have to think about every single line and what that means, and what you're trying to portray. And you know, every naturalistic theatre is like a turned down version. But I mean, even you said you saw how much of an impact Metamorphosis had on my own acting. I think. I mean, as you both know, I auditioned for you both prior to doing Metamorphosis and after, and I personally would say that it helped me develop as an actor, even though both of your plays were more naturalistic. It really had a huge impact on me understanding characters and understanding what's happening in a scene.
No, I mean, I noticed the difference. Obviously, I knew you all the way through that process, and what you were gleaning from being a part of such an intense show. You were absorbing information like a sponge. You know, you were picking up lots of chops from that. 100%.
I have a kind of, I'm not really afraid to admit this either, I have a kind of slight dislike to absurdist theatre, but that's mostly because I know that I can't do it. I'm so jealous, and I'm so jealous of directors that have that creative mindset to be able to put something, because I know that if I was ever in that position of doing a show like that, I'd be so annoyed that I couldn't go over little details to make it feel real, you know, like it comes purely from jealousy. It comes purely from jealousy, you know. It's a very, very, very difficult form of theatre to be able to pull off nicely, you know. But anyway, let's go back to Ernest then. In terms of the process then of putting the show together, would you say that it was extremely difficult? Would you say that it was easier than expected? Kind of what level, you know, would you say it was?
It was a mixed bag. It was a mixed bag. The show itself was remarkably easy to put together. We budgeted a lot of time because we were wary about some of the challenges, and you know, our actors were absolutely fantastic, and they really made the show itself very easy to put together. They were very devoted to the show, and I think it was more than just because they had little else to do with their time. I think they genuinely cared, and they wanted the show to be fantastic, every single one of them. And we were given so much by all of them that they really they made the show much easier than it could have been for us. They devoted a lot to their personal development and how they developed their characters and how they developed acting to camera. You know, we were offering them as much help and advice as we could, and they didn't need a lot of it. You know, they were able to put it together without that because they had a lot of time, and they also had a lot of dedication. They were really dedicated to our show, and it was so fantastic to see. We really appreciated it because it was just it made the end results so powerful and so good.
I'd say on the flip side to that, we had a very steep learning curve to put this together. I think that putting the show together itself was not difficult. However, building the structure around it, building the company, and the way in which we were actually going to stream it, I think we went through 3 different platforms to decide where people were going to perform, because some of the platforms worked for a while and then didn't work, and we had to try and find the most reliable one, and it was very frustrating to have to keep coming across these pitfalls. And it was nothing to do with what the actors side of things. This was all behind the scenes. So they didn't notice, well, I hope they didn't notice when we were getting too frustrated with the technology, but I think it was worth it. I think behind the scenes might have been difficult at times, but it all came together.
Yeah.
And I'd say, especially because of you, Louis, you know, you're a tech wizard. I had no idea what half of the stuff he was saying was.
I wouldn't have any idea either, personally.
It took the culmination of almost all of the talents that I have in this world to get the show to run and to work effectively, because, you know, we needed to do complex things with regards to sound design, and that's not it all sounds very easy to be able to put a couple of effects over the top, but when you're doing it live and when you're doing it or doing it whilst already streaming the video, it ended up having quite complex technological requirements. We had to get some hardware in. We had to
my dining room became a studio.
Yeah, and it was very effective.
Yeah.
It was a very effective studio. It worked really, really well. You know, and I had to do a lot of software tweaking. Indeed, I had to co-author a piece of software that would allow us to stream to both of the platforms that we used effectively. So I actually had to, you know, write some software for it or co-author it. That software is publicly available, so, which is fantastic, and I'm pleased to have contributed towards that. And creating the sound with it, and also making sure that I could be heard when needed, setting up such that when disaster befell us, we could gracefully handle it. You know, we had hiccups on both of our first 2 nights, and I'm very pleased to say that we recovered from them well, which is more important than just the not having the problems at all. I'm not upset that we had issues. I am happy that we resolved them effectively
and professionally. Yeah, and the actors dealt so well with that as well. I was saying to you guys after the show, in fact, I would not have been able to have been in a live show and have someone go like, stop. Do you mind just going back to the beginning of that scene? Right, that again.
Yeah.
It must throw them off so much, and we didn't get one complaint from them.
No.
They all handled it so well, so professionally, that we could have these hiccups and fix them and carry on, and it not affect people too badly, and it not seem unprofessional.
Yeah.
We were very, very lucky to be working with the people that we did.
Looking back on the process and the show, as directors, is there anything that you wish you did differently?
We pretty much fell in line with our plans as a whole, so there isn't a lot that I wish we had done differently. Definitely, I could have been much better prepared on the technical side, and I wish I had had the ability to undertake more rigorous tests ahead of time. I did do some testing, I did make it work, but there was still a scramble at the end when things started to go awry. So I'm disappointed that I wasn't able to prevent that from happening in the first instance.
The things that I would have wanted to have done differently wouldn't have been possible in the climate. I think one of our plans was, if the lockdown was lifted, this was very early on in March when we were planning this, and we thought by June perhaps things will be so that we can all perform together in the same room. And I would have really have liked that, because I would have wanted the actors to be able to interact with each other, even if the performance is still live streamed. But like I said, that wasn't possible, and I was very pleased with the end product.
I think one of the smartest decisions that we made was always being prepared for things not to get better than they had been.
Yeah.
If we'd said, well, we're going to do it, we're going to do this show, but we're going to have everyone in the same room. If we had decided that and we were going to demand that, and then found it wasn't possible and had to postpone the show, that would have been a disaster. But knowing that we always had the fallback of doing it on a conference call was a safety net that we had to employ. And we knew that was always going to work. There would never be an instance, barring the total shutdown of the internet, where that would not be possible.
Well, we set ourselves a deadline of, I think, 2 weeks before the show to say, even if things got lifted a week before, we would still continue with the format of everyone being in their own individual rooms, so as not to throw people off and not have to try and cram in a different way of performing with only 1 or 2 rehearsals beforehand. We wanted enough time to adjust, but unfortunately we didn't even get the option to have to adjust. But, yeah.
So, Fervid TheatreWorks, what's in store next? What's the next step for you guys? Do you have any plans now for the future? Where do you want to see yourself?
Our shows are going to get bigger, and by bigger I mean that they're going to become greater spectacles. The plan going forward is that our shows will continue to be online, and we will continue to have our shows streamed worldwide forever, hopefully. And the next step is, as things start to become easier, what we would like to do is we would like to perform shows using sets, using costume, using props, with our actors physically acting in dramatic spaces. We've got things in the pipeline with regards to that. We're building up a stock room of sets. We have a venue that we're going to be using going forward, and we're going to try and bring
gathering tech.
Yeah, we've got various bits of tech going. So our supply line of things to facilitate that is growing. We will also, depending on the future, hopefully have present audiences live at our shows. So you will be able to make the decision yourself. Would you rather watch it online, or would you rather come and see the show? And both will be free. The principle is that there will be no extra charge for coming to see it live at all. And we're kind of combining these 2 models for how we fund our shows, because in theatre we have long had this principle of the pay what you think show, or pay what you feel, whereby a show is free of charge and they accept donations after the fact. And at the same time, as I said before, coming from the video game streaming world, donations and donation incentives are something that exists out there, and those are actually fundamentally the same thing, but by 2 different names. So the idea is that you'll always be able to see the show at no charge. You'll always be able to see it online, or you can come and see it as it's happening in person, and you'll never have to pay either way. But if you do, then we massively appreciate any support that you can give to help us fund the shows, fund the equipment that we're requiring, fund the upkeep of any venues that we need, etc.
And it's that format in which we're taking, which facilitates being able to live stream the shows. It probably wouldn't be possible to be selling tickets to the shows and also live streaming it for free. So we have to keep both interests from people in the local area who want to see it live, because I'm biased a bit, but I think seeing a show live is a much better experience. And I can't wait to be able to start doing live shows again, because the immersion that you feel being there, watching it happen right in front of you, is so much more intense than watching it on a screen. It's never ever going to be the same as seeing a live stream. But for people who can't attend the show, they still have the option to watch and support, even if they're not in the area, which has been really nice. As we said earlier, we had support from all over the country. We had donations from abroad, and we want to be able to continue to put out content for people who are supporting us from further afield. Yeah,
we've built an audience base, and we hope to retain much of that audience base if we can, and people who enjoyed our show, and people who will see our show after the fact. Our show, you can still watch the recording of the live shows. The final night, because it was the most successful night, will always be available on YouTube, and all 3 nights are available on Facebook, at the Fervid TheatreWorks YouTube channel and the Fervid TheatreWorks Facebook page. We'll probably the plan is to diversify the platforms that we broadcast to, if we can. to try and capture a wider base and to garner as much interest as possible. Because one of the guiding principles as well has been that we want to do it live. We want it to be something that happens in the moment, and that isn't just, we're not creating film, we're not creating a stage play in the traditional sense. It's somewhere in between, and that live aspect makes it so much more interesting that this is really happening right now, on this very day, just a few seconds ago.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we said we'll have to learn is when we're directing these plays in the future, we will be directing them as stage plays, but we will have to take into account where the cameras are going to be. The blocking will have to take the cameras into account as an audience in themselves, which is going to be a new challenge for us going forward in the future.
Yeah, I think it's a really great model that you guys have, and I think it's a really great concept. And like you were saying at the start, Ellie, I think it is very much the way that theatre is now going to have to progress in order to stay alive. My question to you then, with this model and with this format, does this mean that you're still going to be submitting to festivals and the Fringe, or are you going to kind of steer away from those sort of like platforms?
That's something that we're going to have to look at over time and see what opportunities arise. I think in principle, if there's anything that we can do to publicize ourselves and to make us better known within local and wider communities, we're absolutely going to try and do that. And it may come to the fact that one of the best ideas we can have is to do a short tour, because one of the advantages is, provided that we're in a place with a good internet connection, we can do the show. Yeah. The show can move, the show can travel. So it's not something that is location limited in any particular way. And we'll have to see what the future brings. We'll have to see what shows we put on, who wants to see them, what we can do.
Our actors, are they willing to travel with us? Yeah,
we're still, at the end of the day, we still have to remember that this is amateur first. And we have to be respectful and mindful of what our actors are capable of, because they have lives outside of us too. So we have to care about them, or they won't enjoy the experience and they won't grow and develop from it.
Yeah, good answer. So just remind us all again, where can we find Fervid TheatreWorks, and where can we find the shows?
You can find Fervid TheatreWorks currently on Facebook and on YouTube and on Instagram. Just search Fervid, F-E-R-V-I-D, TheatreWorks. You'll find them on all three of those platforms. Our live shows, you can find the replays of on both YouTube and on Facebook. You can go back and watch them. The shows are absolutely fantastic. They're terribly funny. They're really, really worth a watch. And if you follow our various social media platforms, you can find out when our next show will be, how you can take part if you're interested in taking part, or how you can watch it if you're interested in watching it later. We're going to be putting out various drips and drabs of information over time to try and keep up the retention and remind people that we exist for a while until our next show gets underway. So if you pay attention to all of those platforms, you'll see something from us in time.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to say for the record that you two are both such fantastic and such exciting creatives, both of you, and I think anyone that wants to get involved with any future projects, they'd be very, very lucky to, because regardless of any experience they've had or whatever, they'll learn a lot from you two. I think you two have got something that's really good going on here. And I know you keep steering towards the kind of amateur side of it, but I genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, feel that in the future you'll decide that this is something that you can go semi-professional with. I think you have a great concept. You're both very forward thinking, and you know what, personally I'm very, very excited to see where you guys go in the future, and I'm sure I know a lot of other people are as well. So
thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for doing this. I'm sure a lot of people are going to find this very interesting, especially if they've seen the show, to know how it all came together. So thank you very much for coming on the blog, and take care of yourselves.
You too.
See you later. Bye.